Look at you, man. Now back to me. Now back at you, man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if you listen to my LEC preview, he could think like me. I wouldn't be surprised if this is just 3-0 GX, by the way. I have very little faith in BDS. I think GX 3-0 here. I think G2 KC 3-1 G2. And then MKOI Fnatic 3-2 MKOI. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another round of playoffs. We are currently in round 1 after the crossplay decider. Woo! Fnatic versus GX, KC versus Vitality. Let's talk with the premise first, where we're at. We have two teams that have gone through a best of 5 with the pressure of elimination. And keep in mind, this format doesn't have any opportunities for you to qualify through a regional qualifier, whatever. Championship points is completely irrelevant. In the LPL, you have another chance. Only the number 1 team gets to Worlds, and then the second place in terms of the second seed is because of the team who has the most amount of championship points, and then there's another regional qualifier. There's chances. Here, backs against the wall, pressure's on, and GX and Vitality, although their opponents folded like cheap launchers you could get from Temu, they did taste the pressure. And they did also taste victory. I think that's something that is super, super important, because obviously my take here is going to be Fnatic is the favorite against GX and KC is the favorite against Vitality. Plain and simple. They're just better. It makes sense at this point in time. KC versus Vitality, let's start there because it's the easier one to start with. I just think that Vitality is a worse version of what KC is. Vitality is a strong team fighting team. They have some sequences that are good. They're very sporadic in their play. I think that they have good mechanics. I think that's where you highlight them as players. You know, a player like Naknako, a player like Naknako, a player like Kazi. I think on a good day, they can compete with the best in the league. On bad days, it looks a little bit more rough. I do think that in terms of the engine of this team, I've made the point many times. If, for example, Shion stand on this team, I think that they would be a little bit more consistent. But I would like to add that Fleshy begins to look like a more complete support over time. And I think that's a big plus. I don't think Vitality are necessarily specialists in, of course, dealing with KC's biggest weakness and exploiting that. I don't think that Vitality's early games are something that stand out. I think most of the time Vitality tend to, find the team fights around Atakan, around like Drake 4, around Nash, and that's where mechanically they do well. And I think that KC I would describe exactly the same way. I don't think that Shaik necessarily is going to abuse Vladi. I don't think that Linsas is going to abuse the inconsistency of Yike in the early game. And I don't think Naknako will have the edge over Kana, because I think to this day, I still think Kana might just be the best player in the whole league on an individual basis in terms of how solid he is lane-wise. Obviously, in terms of a top lane, you're quite limited in what you can and cannot do. But in terms of Kana, I think like he's the epitome of a vault that is very tough to break. You can just keep hammering away with a hammer, like those crackheads in that Breaking Bad episode. But they just don't get it open, and then eventually he smashes someone's head. I don't know where this analogy is going, so let's just move on. I don't know how to complete the analogy. So Vitality versus KC, as I mentioned, I already touched on some of the weaknesses of KC. They were very, very exposed against G2. This is something I highlighted. Their mid to late game decision making in terms of how sharp they are at pulling the trigger. I think this team needs to have the button, the gun in the hand of Yike and Targamas. They need to play engage in the jungle position and the support position. I don't think when anyone else needs to drive the game. If Vlad is playing Annie, Galio, I really hate that. I don't want to see that. I don't think that's him. I think Vladi is very disconnected from the team. I think that he doesn't play well together with the team. If he plays in isolation, I think he can be very good. When he plays the majors and his job is to farm and to scale, super, super good, because team fighting wise, he's amazing. But when he needs to be dynamic in the game and find plays in the game, this is not his biggest strength. Sadly, it just isn't. Kana, I think that when he plays on the tanks, I don't want to see that. I want to see him to play the isolated matchups. I think if KC can play and breathe through the matchup in the game and they can get to team fights, I think they can out team fight anyone in the league. But I think the only team really that can really decimate KC in their weakness is G2. I think KC looked very bad against G2 because I think G2 are basically specialists in that area in terms of playing the mid to late game, in terms of how they enable their solo laners and how they collapse onto solo lanes, because there wasn't a single fight that KC fought against G2 that was chosen by KC. G2 chose every fight that happened. And when I say that, choosing every fight that happens is a question of, can you control the side lanes? Can you force the enemy to catch waves? Can you force the enemy to play defensive? And then when you are at the objective, you get initiative and you get to choose if you're forcing or not forcing or trading for more resources on the other side of the map. This was the state that G2 was always in. And I don't think that any other team is going to be able to exploit that weakness from KC. I think KOI potentially could. I think that they are second in line. You guys have heard me say this multiple times. I think the teams that went to the internationals have a massive advantage in this competition because the LEC gave these teams no experience or no real ways of improving actively in the matches, which is, of course, just a tragedy in itself. But I do think that KC is going to beat Vitality. And I do think that KC, they've made lower bracket runs in the past. I think that KC can deal with pressure well, but I have to also highlight that the type of pressure that KC is under now is very different from the pressure that they felt in the past. And I think that that's important to highlight. KC, after their winter split, it was almost assumed they're going to make the World Championship. Now, Vitality is coming into this with nothing to lose, and that, of course, creates a situation of danger. And when people ask me, it's like, Yamato, what happened to KC really? The way I would describe it, the way I always make this kind of graph in terms of we have time and then we have performance. It's like most teams, they go through phases where they peak. And the reason they peak is because your good habits and your bad habits bring you to that peak. It's kind of like, imagine, it's like here, let's say you play crazy on side lane, and that gets you to a certain point, and then teams that know how to abuse that's going to beat you, but maybe you get away with things against other teams that you don't. But then in order for you to get better, you need to stop doing the thing that gives you partial success and then restructure. That's where we always get that dip in performance. That dip in performance always comes through. It's like teams that are actively trying to get better, it's rare that they go through everything and there's just a steady progression. That is a rarity. When you peak at a certain competition and you have to take a step back and take a look at what actually stopped you from progressing, like in the case of KC, they're like, oh, we were at first stand, how Alive beat us, what are the things that we need to change, what are the things we need to work on, what are the things that are holding us back, let's kind of explore that. That is also, a detail. Performance can also dip because in reality, maintaining a steady drip of effort through and through is very difficult. This is something that is happening with Anyone's Legend too, for those who know. Anyone's Legend as a team, they of course are known, because Tabe said it publicly, to practice insanely hard. And then at a certain point, after EWC, MSI, they were obviously fatigued, they needed to take a step back and rest a little bit. But then, if you're so used to practicing so damn hard to maintain your level, to play catch-up after you've rested becomes super difficult, because you maintaining your level is reliant on you practicing your damn ass off. And in the short term, that can be very, very valuable because you push yourself and find out about yourself. But then when you're dipping down and your performance, of course, is hurt, finding form again is also something that is difficult. And the reason I mention Anyone's Legend and the similarity to KC, because we do have players like Vladi, like Kalist. These are players that are still figuring out how to get into good form and get out of bad form. And Kalist seems to be back in form, but Vladi, after performing super well, maybe didn't put in the same amount of hours, and now is figuring out, how do I get back into form? And in the end, what makes greatness, true greatness and a legacy, there's not a lot of players that can consistently find form again, because a player like Caps, the GOAT of the region, he has periods where he doesn't perform well, but you always trust him to ramp up in due time. And there's a skill set in that, because you need to understand yourself and really apply your experience and learn about yourself. And that's a journey that is different for everybody. So KC in the current state, you know, I think after, of course, winter, first stand, they tried to restructure. We saw the melee champions, we saw tanks coming through on top, and they were trying to, you know, figure out new ways to play. They lost themselves in that, and at the same time, after being so insanely busy for a very long time, had a full month break. And how that month break affects you is very, very different depending on player. Recovering your form is something that can be tricky. And I think this is what has gone down with KC. I think that they have lost their recipe. They're kind of trying to figure out what works. And within that, when you're having these kind of dips in performances like here, right? When you have the dip in performance, for a lot of teams and a lot of players, that can also be very frustrating. It can be frustrating in the sense that, oh, maybe you're not performing as good as you want to, or you expect your team to be as good as they were before. You want to operate at this level, but you need to kind of work your way down. And then suddenly, maybe you adjust some of the things that you were doing in order to compensate for something else. And then your effort is misplaced. You know, navigating that is very tricky. And then sometimes you can also get very, very poisoned data. You scrim and maybe lose and lose and lose. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to navigate that poisoned data. I'm not saying all of these things apply to Casey, because of course we're just speculating, but I just wanted to give you guys a fuller picture of what actually goes down when teams actually get a peak performance and then they dip in the performance. Like, for example, T1, you know, T1, it happened with T1, happened with AL, happened with Billy Billy. This is just a cycle that teams go through all the time. And then usually when they're going through the shit and they're winning those series, you know, and they go 3-2, they learn about themselves 3-2. Like in D+, for example, now, after going through the play-ins, look a lot better than they did in the regular split and almost took T1 to, just took them out to the lower bracket. Things like that can happen because you learn about yourselves through victories and through hardships. And sometimes the differences between playing really, really good and really, really bad could be very small. Could be draft adjustments, could be play adjustments, could be trust things, and could be just confidence as well. So be wary of things shifting and darting back and forth. KC do have great quality players, but I am worried about, of course, their World Championship bid. But more on that in after their next matchup, and if they beat, of course, Vitality here. Fnatic versus GX. I think the GX as a team, I think they match up quite decently. I think the main thing here for GX is that I don't think that they have the solo laners to punish Poby and Oscarini being disconnected from the game. And I do think that Fnatic just carry a lot more firepower coming into the game. But the unique thing about GX is that I do think that their approach to the early game with Noah, June, and Isma, I think that they have strength in the right positions to maybe compete against Fnatic at what they're good at. But at the same time, Fnatic is very comfortable going against GX in my mind, because I think that if Mickey, Upset, and Razork need to fight back in their role in the first 15 minutes of the game, and that's going to decide things, I do think that Fnatic will just smoke GX. Similar to KC versus Vitality, I do think to some degree Fnatic is, this is the little brother matchup as well. Once again, GX is coming at this as the underdogs, and they've just felt, the satisfaction of 3-0ing a team. The confidence is running high, and Fnatic has a lot of luggage coming into this match. Even though of course, their setup changed and so forth, I am intrigued to see how things are going to play out. Oscarini looked very, very bad against MKOI, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to suffer the same consequence in this team, because I think Lot, to some degree, is also isolated. I think GX have put together, a very, very, respectable performance. And I do think that the likeliness, if I could choose one upset here, I think that GX causing an upset is higher than Vitality in this case. But I do think that Fnatic is going to win, as mentioned before. I think that the main thing that is disappointing for me with GX is that I have higher expectations for Jackies. I thought this guy was going to be the future. I think that after winter, I think his performance has slowed down more and more and more and more. And I think that Nuke also did good in the matchup here. GX, Jackies is the big question mark for me. This is the type of series you need to step up in. This is the type of series you need to be good in. This is the type of series that you need to just put onto your legacy and have it, be the first stepping stone towards a potential career. But right now, Jackies is just a side note in the conversation of mid laners in Europe. He doesn't come up. The other mid laners are just more interesting, and I think that could be the main thing that makes them a competitor into the top 4. But without Jackies performing at a very high level, I think that Giants is reserving that 5th place position. Finally, MKOI versus G2. I think that this, to me, I think we predicted, as you know, you already know. It's like before the split, I predicted this would happen. During the split, I thought it said it would happen. I predicted the score also perfectly. At this point in time, I think the G2 is favored. I think that in regards to how G2 play together on the map, how they connect together with, of course, just Caps and Broken Blade as a pairing, how they base together, sync up together. Just go check some of the video reviews we've done of G2, how well they play the map and how well they get value. G2 is kind of reminding me of the team that they were last year. They can suck out all the air out of a game and play the macro properly. They play the objectives well. I think they just have the best team cohesion by far in the league. And I think that Labrov and Skumond are finally, you know, acting in the interest of their solo laners. They're actively pursuing information. Hasama is doing the same thing, making it easier for Caps and Broken Blade to actually play the game. Skumond is not only farming anymore, and they're actually stepping out on the map and getting data and info, because Broken Blade and Caps in those positions are going to take over completely. They're going to push lanes, and get so much value and really suffocate your solo laners. And I think the same thing is going to happen against MKOI. MKOI's biggest qualifier and the biggest weapon is just, I think Jordi Puna is a great laner. I think Eloy Alvaro, great in the early game. If they can find ways to really break apart G2's early game, I think this could be an interesting series. I think that's the entry point. I think MKOI need to accrue significant advantages in the first 15. And I think it's entirely possible that they do. I think their early game cohesion is a little bit sharper, and that's where I think I can put the criticism towards Labrov's side. But then again, when it comes to G2, I do think that the main team that has managed to abuse that is Fnatic. And Fnatic is a team that is specialized at doing exactly that. And as you could see, MKOI's bot lane against Fnatic, they were dying 2v2 against Maokai Smolder. So MKOI's bot lane phase is very weak. And I think if G2, Hansama, Labrov are winning lane, I think that the G2 game should be rather easy for them. And I think currently Skumond has showcased, like if I would make, you know, a team of the split so far, I think I would simply put Fnatic's bot lane and I would put G2's top side. Skumond has been fantastic. Caps and BB speak for themselves, and then maybe you can put something Kana there as well, because Kana is just sadly elo held and is just dragging his team over the finish line in a lot of cases. But elo held might be a harsh word, but you get what I mean. Yeah. So that's it. I think there is nothing left to add. These are my thoughts about the LEC. We'll see how everything goes down. A little short video for you. If you like this type of content, please leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think. Ask questions. I will answer them below. Leave a like, leave a dislike, and of course, subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way. It means a lot. I'm hoping to get to that 100K. I've been stuck here at 89. Maybe I need to push a little more. Ask you, do some begging, the usual business. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.